Hello and welcome to this introduction to Katello. Feel free to ask any questions that you have either on the Foreman channel on Freenode IRC or in the YouTube live chat. If you have any problems at all with buffering on the live stream, just let me know by dropping a comment into the live chat or into IRC, and I'll drop a link so you can come and join us in the Google Meet. So I don't have anything else for now, so I'm going to just pass it over to Ian to begin. Thank you very much, Ian, for doing this today.
All right, thank you, Melanie. All right, so hi everyone, and welcome to my little Katello 101 presentation here. So my name is Ian Ballou, and I'm a developer for Katello. More specifically, I work for Satellite. Satellite is Foreman plus Katello, but in this presentation, we'll be focusing on the upstream side of it, which is, well, Katello. So then, without further ado, let's get into it. So for this presentation, I'm going to kind of start at a high level and then sort of work our way down into more specifics. At the end of the slides, I'm going to be showing a recorded demo at the end. And then if people have any more questions, I can always pull up my own machine and I can run through some things for you live. So let's get right into it. So the first thing we're looking at, very high level, is what is the very basic stack we have going on here. So I'm not going to dig too much into what Foreman is. I'll give some reminders, but focusing mostly on Katello here. So Katello is a plugin to Foreman, which is a Rails app that manages servers. And Katello talks to Candlepin and Pulp to manage software content. That is like your million-mile overview of what is the architecture here. So just as a quick reminder, we have Foreman. It handles provisioning, configuration, monitoring. And what Katello adds onto that is and content. It adds the content part of it. So y'all might have seen this before. This is the Foreman architecture. I just wanted to point this out because if you look at the top here, we have these smart proxies. So smart proxies are pretty important to Katello. What they are is just a lightweight Ruby Sinatra application that helps Foreman talk to backend services. And as we'll get into it later, smart proxies act as a gateway for Katello's content store, which is Pulp, which you saw in that previous slide. So keep this picture in your head as we keep going. So the next thing is, what is Pulp? So I got this straight from Pulp's website. If you go there, you'll see this. But they say that Pulp fetches, uploads, organizes, and distributes software packages. For example, a Python package. Mirror and mix software repositories, test them, and then go into production. So what Pulp is it is Katello's backend storage for all of your content and the management for it. So there's a few ways that Pulp gets content. One way is by syncing remote repositories, like on mirror.centos.org, for example, or by syncing repositories from the file system, if you wish, or by directly uploading content. So you can just say, hey, Pulp, here's a random file. I'm just going to upload this to you, and then you're going to rehost it for me. So Pulp publishes these repositories, these groupings of content. It publishes them locally to your web server so that they can be consumed by your hosts. And how this fits into Katello is that Katello tells Pulp what content to manage and then indexes that information back into the Katello database so you can see it through the nice Foreman UI. And we just have some examples here of what kind of content you can manage. So we got Ansible playbooks. We have just arbitrary files, container images, RPM content, and more as well. Somewhat recently, with the move from Pulp 2 to Pulp 3, we reintroduced Debian content, so that's there as well. Okay, so that is Pulp. So the next backend service that you saw was Candlepin. I will say, just a disclaimer, I work a lot more on the Pulp side of things with Katello, not so much the Candlepin side. So I can't speak too much to Candlepin, but in a nutshell, Candlepin tells hosts what content they can and cannot access. So Candlepin is all about subscription management. So depending on what subscriptions your hosts have, they can access certain kinds of content. And if you are working with Red Hat content, Candlepin will also help your hosts get access to that specially as well. Okay, so that was an overview of all of the specific components. So let's get started diving a little bit deeper into what Katello does. So to get this started, I want to go over some terminology here just to help. So first off, what is content? Well, content is typically software packages like RPMs. Probably our most used content type is the Yum content type, which is RPMs, package groups. So I'll be focusing more on that for the sake of this 101. A repository is a collection of content. A product is a collection of repositories. The pulp primary is the main pulp smart proxy. And what I mean by that is you always have this one smart proxy that when you sync a repository normally, that's the smart proxy that deals with pulp. But we'll get into this later. You can have separate pulp smart proxies as well. And then lastly, we have a host. What is a host? A host is a server that is managed by Katello. And okay, so let's go on to the next bit here. Okay, so then with the terminology out of the way, what is Katello? So where Foreman lets you provision your hosts, configure them, monitor them, Katello lets you manage software content on those hosts. Katello lets you import software content by syncing local or remote repositories or by directly uploading the content. And then once you get that content to Katello, you can filter and mix it before you host it or distribute it to your servers. So there are kind of three big Katello features here. We have, firstly, subscription management. Secondly, we have patch management, which is you can see what hosts need updates through Errata, and then you can remotely patch the machines quite easily. And then third, we have lifecycle management, where you can move hosts through a software lifecycle, like development, testing, production. And then these hosts can be split among the life cycles so that they receive only software content that belongs in that content view, in that chunk of life cycle. So now delving a little bit more deeply here, we have, this is the Katello repository page. So when you create a repository in Katello and then sync it and then click on the page, it'll look like this. So you know that this repository is synced because in the content counts on the top right, you see the numbers there. That is Katello indexing what was synchronized by pulp. And then you can see some basic information here, like your repository, all the different sync settings, like the URL. And actually, let me zoom in a bit here on some interesting stuff. So here we have the upstream URL. That's the URL that you're syncing from. We have the published at URL, which is the URL that your hosts will consume the published content from. So if you click on that, it should look, the directories and the packages should look just the same as you would see them in the upstream URL. So it's your local mirror. And then we have distribution info on the right. A repository can also be booted from. So if you sync CentOS 7 mirror, for example, you can use Foreman to provision the host and then boot it directly from the content that you grabbed and that you're actually mirroring yourself. So your host that you're booting doesn't have to get its boot packages from the web. It can get it from your local repositories. And then we have the content counts here. So you see this repository has just over 10,000 packages, has 88 package groups, and nothing else. These are the yum content type, by the way. Just figure out, make that clear. Oh, and then also at the bottom here, you see upload packages. If you want, you could upload your own RPMs as well. So there are a few ways for Katello to receive the content, to manage it and host it. You see at the top, there's this upload scenario. So you would upload the content to Pulp through Katello, and then Katello will index that. And then there's the sync scenario, where Katello will tell Pulp what to sync. Pulp will sync it, fetch it from the remote repo, and then Katello will grab the information from Pulp so it knows what Pulp downloaded. Also, you can have what's called a sync plan. So sync plan can be used to sync any number of products on a schedule. Sync plans are not per repository, they're per product. So it would be whatever group of repositories is in your product there that you have set up on the sync plan. Okay, so once you sync a repository, your host can have access to it. For those of you, so I haven't mentioned content views yet, but I just want to get this out of the way. It's a common misconception that you have to do content views in lifecycle environments to actually, receive your content and have hosts consume it. But that's not true. You can just sync a repository and use it right away. If that's your simple use case you want, then nice and easy. But we'll be getting into later, more specifically, how you manage this content. Okay. So now we're going to get into content views. This is where we start digging a little more into what makes Katello special. So a content view is a group of one or more repositories with optional filters. A content view, think of it like a blueprint. So you have this blueprint, and what you do is you publish the blueprint, which will create a content view version from the rules in the content view blueprint. A content view version is a snapshot of a content view with a particular configuration. So you see here in the content view, we have some repositories. We got Centos 7 Kickstart, we got BusyBox container image, and then we got a file repo. And then we have some filters. So for example, I wanted to exclude these two WordNet and ImageMagick packages for some reason. And then I wanted to include only the latest Docker tag from BusyBox. So when you publish it, you get this. You get a content view version 1.0. And it has, for the content, it's got all the CentOS 7 content except the RPMs I didn't want. For the container content, it only has the latest, all the content relating to the latest tag with BusyBox. Then for the file content, there are no filters, so you get everything. So now you can take content views a step further, and you can have something called a composite content view. So a composite content view is a grouping of content views, and you can publish that into one super big content view. And this can be handy. Let's say, like in this example, your composite content view is your software stack, and then you have 3 other content views for your web application, your web server, and your operating system. The first 2 are on the latest, and the operating system is limited to just version 1.0. When you publish your software stack, you'll get, just like it's a content view, you'll get a content view version that includes everything in the content views that are inside the composite. So I mentioned here that this one operating system is stuck at 1.0 and the other 2 are at latest. Well, there's something called composite content view auto publish, which is a cool feature. So if you publish one of the content views that's within the composite, if you have composite content view auto publish turned on, it'll automatically publish a new version of your composite. But if you have limited the versions of any of the content views in the composite, it won't update those. So your old data can be safe there. So that is composite content views. Okay, the last kind of advanced content view feature that I'll mention here is dependency solving. So Pulp is able to figure out which RPMs are dependent on each other. So if you have your content view here called My Software Stack, you have RPMs A through Z, and you know some dependencies. So A requires B and Z requires A. Let's say you add a filter to only include Z. Now, in a normal case, if you didn't have dependency solving on, you would end up breaking your repository, because Z requires A, you'd only get Z, you wouldn't be able to install the RPM unless you're connected to the internet. But let's assume here that you're not. So if you have dependency solving turned on, it seems obvious, but it'll pull in A and B. And this is very helpful. Now, one thing to note with dependency solving, it does take quite a bit of compute power. So I wouldn't just go turning it on whenever you don't need it, because it'll cause these publishes to take a bit more time, because it has to calculate all of those dependencies. Okay,
Ian,
yeah.
one question on the live stream that we have so far. Does Catello ever overwrite content, for example, older content views?
No, Katello won't overwrite older content views. The content view, it won't overwrite older content view versions. Yeah, so a content view version is a snapshot. It'll be there forever until you tell Katello to delete it. Yeah, in every case, we make sure that the content view versions they exist as they are. Yeah, so you don't need to worry about having them be overwritten. Were there any other questions?
That was it. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Okay, so on to the next thing. So we just went over content views. The next part, after talking about content views, is lifecycle environments. So a lifecycle environment represents a step in your software development cycle. So an example cycle is, like I mentioned before, development, testing, production. You're not limited to this. You can have a ton of different steps if you want. You can have even different branching steps. We just use this because it just seems to be the most basic case, and a lot of people like to do this too. So when you have these different lifecycle environments, the first one you always start off with on a fresh install is library. So library is this special lifecycle environment that even when you sync content that doesn't have anything to do with a content view, it will exist in library. And if you look in the back end, there actually also exists a first content view, which is called the default organization view. So that's all in the back end. But you have to add your own lifecycle environments on the end to configure it yourself. So when you first publish a content view, it goes into library. And library will have this content view, and it'll also have the default organization content view in the back. That's essentially a way for you to consume the content right out of the box without even using content views if you want to. But anyway, that aside, you first publish your content view, the version goes in library. Then you can promote the content view version to go to your next lifecycle environment. So for example, development. And then you can, so let's say you forgot a dependency or something like that. What you can do is you just fix your content view to make sure it has that dependency. Maybe you messed up a filter or something, and you publish again. So now you have content view version 2.0. Version 1.0 is still there, but when you publish 2.0, now that becomes the content view version for library. And then you can promote it, and then it'll be in development. So as long as there's no other content view kind of to kick it out, when you promote it, it'll keep the old lifecycle environment as well. So then you can keep going. So the content view, you promote it to testing, you promote it to production. So in this case now, content view version 2.0 is in all 4 of these lifecycle environments. But really, the best way to think about it is that ideally what you aim is for your lifecycle environment to be in the latest one that you publish it in, so production. But let's say down the line, you decide to promote everything to version 3.0, and then you have a failure in production. You knew that 2.0 worked, 3.0 is something new. What you can do is you can re-promote content view version 2.0 to production directly so that the hosts that are subscribed to production will all get that content again. So it's just a handy way for you able to keep track of this. Now, in practice, what does this look like? So hosts are distributed among the development lifecycle. For an example, your hosts could be VMs in the cloud, and then the testing and production hosts could be like on your premise or something. So you see the development VMs over here are on Content View 3. The testing ones are on Content View version 3. And then production is on the Content View version 2.0. So the next step is, how do we distribute this content? And the answer to that question is through content hosts. And I'm just going to take a pause here to get a drink. All right. So on to content hosts. So what is a content host? A content host is an extension to a regular Foreman host that holds all of the host's content and subscription-related information. So you have a content host right here. You can see some info on it. You see it has some errata there that's installable that relates to patching. We'll get into that soon. In the bottom right, you can see the content host's content. So relating to content views, you see the content view is default organization view and the lifecycle environment is library. That means that this content host is just consuming from repositories that you synced. You don't even have content views set up necessarily. You just are using the default content view that you get with a Katello install. And that's what this host is doing. You see there's another lifecycle environment that we could go to, development, down there. And then you see some info on the left. So a typical workflow for registering a content host is you'll install the CA certificate RPM from your Katello on your host. Then you'll register the client using Subscription Manager. You'll choose your lifecycle environment and content view in the bottom right. And then you will enable subscriptions. So if you created a product with some repositories, you'll go into subscriptions, and then you'll say, yes, I want to use this product. You can also choose certain repositories if you want as well, if you want to filter it more fine-tuned. Or a kind of newer feature is if you're using simple content access, your hosts will just have access to all of your subscriptions automatically. Okay, so let's get a little bit more into registering these content hosts. So I mentioned you can just register them directly. If you want to make it a bit quicker, you don't have to do this, but there is something called activation keys. So again, these are optional, but it makes your life a bit easier. So when you create an activation key, it allows you to register your hosts to Katello with a specific lifecycle environment and content view like preset. So you don't have to type like the environment that you want in Subscription Manager. Instead, you will tell Subscription Manager to register with this activation key by its name. The activation key is nice because you can specify the subscriptions. You can also override which repositories you want, and then you could use the same key for many hosts if you would like to. And it just makes things more convenient. So that's activation keys. Okay, so kind of a slight tangent, but now that we know how to register our hosts, what we need to learn is how to perform actions on them from Katello. So this is where remote execution comes in. So remote execution is a way to run remote jobs on hosts over SSH. Package installation on host has historically been done with Katello agent, and it still is, but remote execution will be replacing that at some point. So I'm going to be going over remote execution only here. So remote execution, or REX for short, you can run shell commands. It's nice. You can filter which hosts you run these commands on, so you can have a search query, and it'll send the SSH commands to all of your hosts there. You can also set up a schedule, so you don't have to set up any cron jobs or anything. And then you also get reports when things fail. So you can use remote execution to install packages remotely on your hosts. This is a big, nice feature with remote execution, besides all of the endless possibilities you can do with it anyways. But this just makes it nice and easy. So you, straight from the content host page, you can install packages that need updates. And good segue, speaking of updates, so we need to talk about errata now. So how do we know when to trigger a package update on a system? And that's with errata. So errata are a Yum content type that represents software packages. And the singular to errata is erratum. An erratum will have any number of RPMs related to it. And those RPMs will be installed when the erratum is applied to a host. So you can see here, I got a little snippet of some errata. There are different types. You can see this one at the top is a bug fix. In the middle, there are product enhancements, and then there are also security errata as well. Now, not every Yum repository has errata. I'm guessing the community before came up with a way to import Centos errata into pulp 2, but now we're on pulp 3, so there's going to have to be a new solution for that. I'm assuming people are already working on it if they haven't already got it working. But if your repository doesn't have errata, don't fear. We still show you which packages are available for updating. So you can see here on this content host, we have the Katello client on the bottom. The top one is showing zeros because I don't have it properly subscribed, but the bottom one is properly subscribed. You see there's 1 security erratum, 5 bugs, 3 product enhancements, and then 158 upgradable packages. That's how you know who needs updates. Oh, and I will say, it is just as easy as long as you have your remote execution set up, or if you're using Katello agent, if you have that set up, you can just apply this errata with a single click, and Katello will make sure that all the packages get installed. Now, one thing that's cool about errata, just a handy little trick, is that you can filter it by lifecycle environment. So let's say, this is kind of an overview screen of all the errata on your system. If you just want to check, do the production machines have any security updates they need, you can just change that lifecycle environment to production or whatever you want, and then it'll show you all the errata that are applicable to the machine. Okay, so another detail to installing errata. Since a content view version is a snapshot, it can be out of date with the main repository that it was copied from. So it's a snapshot of the content that was in the repository at that time. Content view versions don't change on underneath your feet. It'll just stay there. So the old content will be in the content view version. But as the repository updates, as you sync it, it'll get new security updates. But your host might be subscribed, or I shouldn't use the word subscribe. Your host might be attached to that older content view version, but it might still need that critical security update. So this is where incremental update comes in. If there is a security erratum that is available in your main library repo, but not in your content view, Katello will warn you, and then when you click to apply the errata, it will update your content view version, or sorry, it'll create a new content view version from that, say, older version 3.01 into a version 3.1. So it won't modify the existing content view version. It'll create a new one with a point release, and it'll have that errata erratum with all of the packages that come with it. So that's what happens if you need to quickly update just a single or any number of security patches directly to a content view version. So that way you don't have to worry about doing repromotions or anything like that. It's all very nice. Okay, so that pretty much covers the biggest chunks of content management with Katello. I'm going to talk about infrastructure next, but I'm just going to take a pause just to ask if there are any questions. Okay, sounds like we're all good.
There are none on the live stream. Peter, have you anything you'd like to ask?
All right, sounds good then. I will keep going. All right, so I'm going to talk a bit about Katello and the infrastructure now. Okay, so this first scenario, remember I talked about smart proxies way at the beginning. This is where they come in especially important. So let's give a scenario here. Let's say your Katello installation is in Boston, but your production data center is all the way in Perth. That's a far distance for you to be downloading your packages from every time. So the handy solution to that is a smart proxy with Pulp. So your Katello will always have its main smart proxy that your synced content is managed with. But what you can do is you can quickly set up another smart proxy, any number of other smart proxies that are closer to where your servers are. So your smart proxy here in Perth will actually sync from your main Katello, at some interval you choose, or manually if you want to pick when. And then after that, you can operate on its own until it needs to be synced again. So that way you can make sure that you keep the network usage locally to where your systems are. So that is a very nice advantage to these Katello smart proxies, and they're quite easy to set up as well. Katello also has some nice infrastructure flexibility. So again, let's say you have a Katello set up in Boston, but then somewhere you have a super secret, secure air-gapped data center that's not connected to the internet at all. What you can do is using what we call import-export. You can export content views and such from your Katello in Boston. You can export it to a USB stick, for example, and then you can import it into your data center that's air-gapped, and you can make it look just like the one that you have in Boston that's open to the public. Another nice thing that you can have set up is you can have load balanced setups. So the example load balancer we like to give is HA proxy. So let's say you have another far away data center that needs smart proxies closer to it. You could have 2 or however many smart proxies with a load balancer in between, and then it'll make sure that your network traffic is routed properly. I haven't done this myself personally, but I know that we have documentation on it somewhere. Okay, now we're going to get into the demo that I have. So here's just some prep. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using Katello to install a web application on a host. The main server that I have is called Centos 7 Katello Nightly 2. It has Pulp installed on it. And then we have another host, which is a VM called Katello Client 3. And that's where we're going to be installing the content. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be syncing the CentOS 7 repository, which has Apache Tomcat and all of its files that we need, so that we don't have to go to the internet on our client to install it. And then we're going to be using a file repository to hold a WAR file for the web application. And then we're going to be deploying it all over remote execution. OK, so let us get into the demo. Just need to set it up so that.
Just while you're setting it up, there's just one clarification of, are you demoing Katello 4, Ian?
This is not Katello 4.0. This is, gosh, what version is this? It'll look, the thing that I'm running through is going to look just like Katello 4.0, but this is an older version. Actually, this was a development version of Katello. This is probably more like Katello 3.16, I'm thinking. But regardless, this demo is nice because it'll look just the same if you tried it on Katello 4.0.
Okay, thank you, Ian.
Okay. All right, so here's the demo. So I'm starting off by creating a new repository. I'm going to call it my web application, and it's going to be a file repository. I already have a product. It's called my custom product. We're not giving it any upstream URL because I'm going to be uploading the content directly to it. So we click on my web application. We browse, and we have our helloworld.or file, and then I'm uploading it. And now we can see it's successfully uploaded, and there's one file in the repository. So next up, I'm going to be creating the Centos 7 repository that has my RPMs for Tomcat. It's of type yum. I've added the upstream URL to Centos 7. And I'm going to be changing the download policy to on demand so that Pulp doesn't download everything all at once, only when I need it. So now we're going to sync the Centos 7 repo. So after we sync it, we can see now there are packages, 10,000 packages, 88 package groups, and we are all set to consume it. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a content view. So I filter it, so I have only the packages that I need in this content view, so the host doesn't consume anything extra. I'm using solve dependencies because I'm going to be doing some filtering. I don't know exactly what Tomcat needs. So I've added the Centos 7 repo to my content view. And I've also added the file repo to the content view just to keep things organized. Now I'm going to make a filter. So this filter will be an inclusion filter, which means only what I specify in the filter should make it into the content view version. So I'm going to add a rule. The first rule will be Tomcat, which here we can see the matching content for Tomcat. And then here, Tomcat Servlet 3.0 API, you can check the matching content to make sure Katello sees what you want. And then we're going to publish it, and it's going to use the filters to create our new content view version 1.0. And for this example, for this demo, I'm not going to be using any lifecycle environments, just library. So we published it. We have 206 packages and one file. So you can see the repositories here. It went all the way down to 206 packages from 10,000. And just to prove it, we have all the Tomcat RPMs here. All right, so now we're going to set up an activation key to more easily register our system. So we have my web application key. I'm setting it up for the library environment, and then my web application view content view. So we got a command here that we can use to register the machine. And then I just need to add a subscription to the activation key. And then all we need to do is run this on our machine. So I'm going to pause for a moment. In this command, we have the subscription manager command to actually register to Katello. And then also, I am making sure that I have this my custom product CentOS 7 repo enabled on the machine. So I have run this on the client. And now you can see that a content host was created. Katello did this through the information from Subscription Manager. And you can see some information on the content host. You can see its content view, its lifecycle environment. You can see some properties about the host, some hardware issue details. You can see the activation key that was used. Okay. So now it's time to install the content. So you could install the package right here. I'm not going to do that for the sake of the demo, but you could do it here with Katello agent or remote execution. Instead, just to show there's multiple ways to do it, I'm going over to the hosts page. So this is the foreman style host page, and I will schedule a remote job from here. So you can do it in either place. So I'm going to paste in my command here. You can see the search query will match Katello client. Okay, so this is the command that I'm going to be running. I'm just going to be installing Tomcat. I'm disabling all repos and enabling only the one I synced, just to prove that it's using the content that I synced. And so all I need to do is I just need to submit it, and then it will run the job on my client. And we can see it was successful. Alrighty, now we're going to go over to the content host just to double check that it was actually installed. When you install new packages on your machine, thanks to Subscription Manager and the Yum related plugins, it uploads what packages are installed. That's how we calculate the errata and such. So you see that Tomcat was installed in here. Great, we have what we need. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to set up the files for the web application. So I'm going back over to the host page, and I'm going to schedule another remote job to send over the files. So in this command, I'm wgetting the helloworld.war file, and I'm going to be getting that from the published repository in Pulp that relates to the content view version that we created. And I'm going to be sticking that in the varlib Tomcat web apps folder, and then I'm going to be starting Tomcat. Okay, so we're submitting this. Then we're going to scroll down, and it succeeded. Now we can look at the web application. And there we have it. So all from Katello, you deployed a very basic little web application, just to show some of the powerful things that Katello is able to do. Oops. So that was the entire presentation. I will say, for anyone who wants to try out Katello, we have something called Forklift. It's on our GitHub under the Foreman GitHub organization. And Forklift is incredibly handy. If you're new and you just want to check it out, as soon as you run through the install steps for Forklift, all you need to do on your machine is just type Vagrant up, CentOS 7 Katello 4.0, for example, and it'll create a VM for you that will have Katello on it, and you'll just be able to browse Katello right away and start playing with it and trying it out. So I would highly recommend trying out Forklift if you want to play with Katello. And yeah, so that is it. I am up for any questions that anyone has.
Thank you very much, Ian. So we just give a minute to see if there are any questions.
For sure.
And
Yeah, we can just let the live stream catch up. Hopefully it's not too far behind.
no, it doesn't seem to be. So lots of thanks and awesomes so far.
Awesome.
I think we're caught up.
All right.
Cool. So has anyone on the Google Meet any questions, any comments either? Feel free to speak.
Mm-hmm. Also, for anyone who has any further questions, you can find me on the Foreman IRC as iBaloo. You can also find me on the Foreman community forums as iBaloo, IBALLOU. And yeah, if you ever have any questions, definitely feel free to hop on either of those. We are actively looking at them every day.
I see there are lots of thanks in, and there are lots of there's lots of likes, thumbs up for you. But I don't see any questions for now. So as Ian said, feel free to ask any questions on our community discourse. And if anyone is watching this back at a later stage, feel free to drop a question into the comments or onto our forum and community discourse, and we will follow up with you for the answers for them. So next week we have a community demo, and one of the main features of that will be an update on the design of the host details page, and it's related to Catello in a way because it's looking at the consolidation of hosts and content hosts in the UI. So make sure to tune in for that next week. And if there's nothing else, I'd just like to thank Ian very much. I very much enjoyed this presentation myself, and I'd like to thank everybody who came along today and watched this live and asked questions. And we will see you again soon. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.
Okey doke. And we